If you asked most people of a certain age who the first British person in space was, they'd likely say Helen Sharman in 1990. But if you asked who was the first British person to land on the moon, they'd give you the wrong answer, unless they said that no Brit has ever walked the lunar surface. That's the official truth. But what they won't tell you is that just before the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, there was a top-secret joint mission to the moon. While the world believed the USSR had minimal connection with the UK, behind the scenes, things were very different. The Cold War had made us official enemies, but on a personal level, the flame of camaraderie was still flickering. Barely. I can't disclose everything I know. Most of it is still under the Official Secrets Act until at least 2040, and likely extended another 50 years after that. I have no proof. The few documents assigned to me were confiscated and destroyed in a furnace beneath Whitehall. But I can tell you this much. I was there. It was June 1989 when I was first chosen, if that's what you want to call it. I can't remember the exact date. 2 men entered my study unannounced. I thought it was a prank at first, a university joke, but they were serious. Dead serious. They told me I was required, not asked. Required. It was said in such a way that my refusal wasn't an option. They led me outside to a car parked directly at the building entrance. Jet black, sleek. I later identified it as a Jaguar XJ12, probably modified. The ride was quiet. One of them occasionally answered calls via a CB radio in the dashboard. Within an hour, I was seated in a small, windowless room in Westminster. Thick carpets, dim lights, no clocks. Then the door opened. A dozen people entered, mostly middle-aged, some older. A few were definitely Russian. They all carried overstuffed folders and spoke in sharp, agitated voices. None of them looked at me at first, not until one older Russian man barked something in his language. The last time a human being set foot on the moon was December 14th, 1972, almost 20 years ago. We must know if they are still up there. What did he mean by that? Everyone knew the Apollo 17 crew returned safely. The silence that followed was unnerving. I naively blurted out, "Sorry. I thought all 3 of the Apollo 17 crew came back to Earth." The man glared at me. "Do you think we were fearful of mere human beings on the moon?" He leaned in, voice low and firm. "You have nor ever will have any idea what we found up there." He handed me a folder marked Classified Level 7. Inside were black and white photos. The first showed a blurry structure on the lunar horizon. The second, a lunar lander, perfectly sliced in half, no jagged edges, as if done by a laser. The third, what looked like a body, half ejected from a spacesuit, the visor shattered, limbs distorted unnaturally. Another image showed several more suits, empty, twisted, scattered roughly 75 yards from the camera. All bore Cyrillic characters. The man spoke again. "Russian lunar landing, October 1968. I was stunned. He went on. "We landed 6 kilometers from Apollo 17's site. We lost contact 5 hours after touchdown. We assumed their fuel cell failed, that they died quietly. But this was no mechanical error." One of the British men slammed his hand on the table. "For Christ's sake, Kratsov, stop the propaganda. Just tell us what happened." Kratsov continued. "The Americans found it. Apollo 17th December 1972. They photographed the wreckage. Human remains. Decapitated. The American liaison confirmed it. They saw something. Figures. Outside the module. picking through equipment. We told them to wait. The return module wasn't aligned yet, so they waited and watched. The figures, only 20 feet away, were barely visible, shadowy, inhuman. The Apollo module, built to resist vacuum in launch forces, was never designed for this. So why did the crew look normal when they came back? I asked, not thinking. The American answered, because the men you saw weren't them. They were actors, stand-ins. The real crew never recovered. Physically, they were fine. Mentally, they were shattered, sedated to eat, to sleep, to stop them from screaming about what they saw. He paused. One of them said the figures stared into his soul, not with eyes, just presence, malice. Kravtsov handed me more pages, more photos. I turned to the last one, a towering figure, silhouetted, 10 feet tall, human-like, but not. So, what do I have to do with this? I asked. You're a professor of psychology, a voice replied. If the next crew sees them and they break, we need someone who can fix them. My anger flared. Because I worked in a mental asylum for 18 months. I'm supposed to fix men who've seen something beyond human comprehension. Kravtsov didn't respond. Just pushed the documents toward me. Take these. Read them. If you change your mind, let us know. I took them. Not because I wanted to, because I feared what would happen if I didn't. I never planned to say yes. I told myself I wouldn't. But part of me already knew. This wasn't the end. The envelope I received was labeled not only classified level 7, but also sealed with a strange wax insignia I didn't recognize. Half Russian lettering, half something else. Something older. As if whoever commissioned the seal didn't want just secrecy, but reverence. Like they were guarding not data, but sacred knowledge. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I read and reread the documents until my eyes blurred. One page described physiological changes in the recovered astronauts, altered pupil dilation, erratic synaptic firing, and in one case, an inexplicable increase in neural density. Another included pages of interview transcripts, questions that went unanswered, words scratched out. One note simply read, "He no longer believes he is human." By 4 a.m., I knew. I had to say yes. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to know what was on the moon. I phoned the number they gave me. A woman with a voice like gravel answered. "Response code," she asked. I hesitated, then read from the card they gave me. "Ashes to ashes. Dust to dust," she replied. The line went dead. 3 hours later, I was picked up again. Same car, same 2 men. This time, we drove in silence all the way to RAF Bryce Norton. There, in a hangar away from the runways, I saw something I'd only seen in spy thrillers. A blacked-out military jet. The British flag stitched beside a Soviet one. Inside the jet, we weren't alone. A crew of 5. 2 British officers, 2 Russian, and 1 man I hadn't seen before. Middle Eastern, perhaps, or Central Asian. He didn't speak, but watched everything with surgical precision, as if we were all just variables in some equation he was calculating. We flew for 7 hours. No announcements, no windows. When the jet finally touched down, we were somewhere cold, very cold. A rush of air pierced my coat as we exited. Snow crunched underfoot. The sun hovered at the horizon like it was late afternoon, but my watch said noon. We entered a large facility built into the side of a mountain. It had no signage, just a steel door, guarded by soldiers with no insignia. Inside, the walls were lined with lead. I was scanned, searched, and finally led into another room without clocks. Kravtsov was already there. He smiled when he saw me. "I knew you'd come, comrade," he said. curiosity is more powerful than fear. I looked around. Where are we? Spitsbergen, Norway, an old coal mining colony, repurposed for deep isolation. He pointed to the corner of the room where a strange device sat. A chair surrounded by a ring of small metallic spheres, each about the size of a grapefruit, suspended in the air by invisible forces. Electromagnetism, I assumed, but I wasn't sure. Kratsov gestured for me to sit. Before we take you further, you need to understand the mental architecture of what we're facing. This device, well, let's say it tunes your brain, helps you see beyond the veil. I was hesitant. What veil? Kratsov's eyes grew serious. The one they pull over you the moment they realize you're looking. I sat down. A low hum filled the room. The spheres began to glow softly, like moonlight reflected off water. My scalp tingled. I closed my eyes, and I saw it. Not a place, not a person, a presence, a pressure in the mind, like static charged with meaning. My thoughts spiraled and disconnected, yet focused. Images flooded in. Ruins on a barren plain. Statues shaped like men but wrong. A moon not as a rock, but as a vault. Not empty, buried. I gasped and opened my eyes. The glow faded. Kratsov handed me a glass of water. "Most people pass out," he said. "You did well." I tried to speak. My voice was hoarse. "What was that?" "A frequency," he said. "One that exists only on the moon. Or rather, in parts of it." I stared at him. "You're saying the moon emits thoughts?" "Number, I'm saying it stores them." Before I could reply, the Middle Eastern man entered. For the first time, he spoke. "Ibrahim al-Sayyid," he said, "I specialize in linguistic archaeology. I believe what you saw is not your imagination. It's a message, a form of quantum mnemonic storage." I asked him the only question that mattered. "From who?" He looked at me. "Not who. What?" The next 3 days were intense. I was debriefed, scanned, interviewed, and tested. I learned we were to join a crew, 4 men, 2 women, all specialists, engineers, pilots, linguists, all sworn to the same silence. Each had experienced the tuning device. One night, as snow lashed the windows, Kratsov visited me again. "You've read the Apollo transcripts?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Then you know they lied, not just about what they found, but about who came back." I nodded. "So, what's the real plan?" He leaned in. "We're going back, but not just to observe. We're going to enter the anomaly." My blood went cold. Enter? Yes. It wasn't just a landing site. It was a door, and it's opening again. I didn't sleep that night either. We sat in silence for a long time, after Kratsov dropped the truth on me. The notion that not only had extraterrestrials made contact with the Soviets, but that they had shared technological advancements. Well, it was overwhelming. My mind raced with implications. Who else knew? How far had this influence gone? And what did they truly want in return? Kratsov finally broke the silence. "You understand now why we needed a psychologist, don't you?" "I do," I muttered, still trying to steady my breath. "But why me? There must be others more qualified. Military psychologists, neuroscientists." "We tried them," he interrupted. "But they were too indoctrinated, too focused on fitting the anomalies into their training. We needed someone with a mind still open to possibilities." I suppose that was a backhanded compliment. I took another sip of my now warm whiskey, trying to focus. "So, the semiconductors. You're telling me the tech boom, the sudden leap in computing power, wasn't entirely ours?" Kratsov nodded solemnly. "Correct. We were given guidance, subtle but clear. In return, They asked for two things: observation and access. Access to what? To minds, human consciousness, emotions, patterns. We let them monitor specific subjects over time. We even helped administer psychological stressors to observe their reactions. I stared at him, horrified. You experimented on your own people? Not without oversight, he said defensively. Only in cases where it could be contained. We weren't monsters. We drew lines. And did they respect those lines? His face darkened. Number. But we learned that too late. Kratsov stood, paced to the window of the hotel room, and stared out into the dark London street. They understand us, but they are not like us. They do not feel guilt or mercy or shame. They observe. They learn. And if something impedes that learning, they remove it. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. So, what happened in 1990? He turned slowly. The mission was supposed to be different. We had learned from 68. We had even been given updated shielding by our benefactors. The crew was carefully selected, emotionally stable, low trauma history, high cognitive resilience. The module was fitted with special recording equipment. The idea was to establish a more direct communication. But the minute they landed, something went wrong. I leaned forward. What do you mean? Kratsov lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The crew became disoriented. They described seeing flickers, like shadows moving at the edge of vision. And then, a presence. One of the cosmonauts began reciting old Orthodox prayers. The other started laughing uncontrollably. By hour 6, one had gone catatonic. The other two began attacking the onboard instruments. What did Mission Control do? We issued the abort protocol, automated return, but by then, it was too late. One of them overrode the command and attempted to stay. Why? Kratsov inhaled deeply. He said they needed him, that he understood now, that Earth was a lie, and this was truth. A long silence passed. They died, didn't they? I said quietly. We recovered 2 bodies, one intact, though oxygen deprived. The other, he hesitated, was unrecognizable, but the third, there was no trace, no body, no signal, just silence. Was the module intact? Yes, he said slowly, but it was changed. Some of the materials weren't what we sent up. Alloy structures had morphed, like something had melted and reforged them using blueprints we didn't write. I felt like I was going to be sick. And you think the same force helped the Americans? He nodded. Of course. Their semiconductor breakthroughs mirror ours almost identically, and their rise in technology follows the same timeline, but they've handled it differently. How so? Kratsov turned, eyes sharp. They commercialized it, spread it, put it in the hands of the public, not to empower them, but to track them. Every circuit, every chip, every signal, part of a larger network. My mouth went dry. You mean? He nodded. Every microprocessor is a fragment of their architecture, distributed intelligence, learning, adapting, watching. We thought we were integrating alien tech, but in truth, it was integrating us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of the conversation pressed on my chest like a lead blanket. So why tell me this now? Kratsov crushed the cigarette into an ashtray. Because you're already involved. You saw the documents. You know the truth. And something is coming. The new millennium, they say, will bring about a new awakening. But whose awakening? He stepped closer. You must be ready. They no longer need to observe. Now, they want to intervene. My voice trembled. Intervene how? But he didn't answer. He only handed me a small silver flash drive. What's on this? Proof, he said, enough to make anyone listening to this conversation disappear, but also enough to prepare you, if you're brave enough to open it. And with that, Kravtsov turned, opened the door to the hotel room, and vanished into the London night. I stared at the drive in my hand, cold, silent, heavy with unseen knowledge, and I realized this was no longer just a mission. It was a warning. It wasn't until 1997 that I saw him again. Kravtsov, or as the Americans referred to him in whispers, Kratz Alpha Gamma. I never expected to run into him at a psychology convention in West London, but nothing about Kravtsov was ever accidental. He didn't do coincidence. The event was held at a dull concrete building near Stonebridge Park, a 3-day symposium on post-traumatic psychosis and recovery models. It should have been mundane, but the moment I heard that word, comrade, echoed in a thick Russian accent across the bar. Every muscle in my body tensed. He was leaning against the counter, holding a glass of brandy and smoking a cigar thick as a toddler's wrist. He looked different. Gone was the stiff military posture, the metal-covered uniform. Now he wore a casual brown blazer and spoke with the careless comfort of a man long removed from power. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said as I approached. Kravtsov smirked. "Nor I you, comrade. But you are difficult to find these days." He gestured to an empty seat beside him. I sat down. The crowd around us buzzed with academic gossip and soft jazz, oblivious to the gravity of our reunion. I had so many questions. "How did you know I'd be here?" I asked. He grinned. "I called your old university. They said you were no longer teaching. So, I made inquiries, pushed some levers, greased a few wheels." It chilled me how easily he could still reach me, even after all this time. Our paths should have never crossed again. And yet, here he was, back in my life, as if summoned by the gravity of something neither of us had truly escaped. "So, what are you doing now?" I asked. He took another sip of brandy and leaned in. "When Mother Russia began to fall apart, I did what any clever man would do. I sold her bones." I blinked. "Come again." "Tanks, helicopters, guns. I was assigned to liquidate military assets in Eastern Europe. They told me to send the money back to Moscow, but I kept a few extras." "You stole tanks?" I asked, half laughing. "I redistributed them," he said, amused. "For cash, for gold. I learned fast. American banks ask too many questions, but gold bars and US dollars are loyal friends, silent ones." I stared at him, trying to decide if he was joking, but his expression was flat, dead serious. He wasn't bragging. He was reporting facts. "Didn't anyone try to stop you?" "Comrade," he said, leaning closer. "Those who cared didn't know, and those who knew didn't care. We talked politics, global decline, capitalism's slow rot, and Russia's fall from imperial ambition. But eventually, as the hour grew late and the brandy darker, we landed on the subject that haunted us both, the lunar mission of 1990. Kravtsov went quiet. The jovial tone dropped instantly. "If we are to speak of this," he said, "we must move to somewhere private." I agreed. We left the bar and walked silently through damp London streets to my hotel, an unremarkable place, just a few minutes away. Inside, we sat across from one another. He didn't waste time. "The mission never should have happened," he said. "Then why did it?" "Because the men above us were desperate. Desperate to understand what we touched in '68. Desperate to make contact again." I nodded. "And did you?" He looked out the window before replying. "Yes, but they were not what we thought. They didn't speak. Not with words. They spoke in science." "Science?" I echoed. "Yes," he said, taking another drink. After the failed 1968 mission, we launched probes. Inside them, we placed faulty semiconductors made of germanium. They responded. I tried to follow. How? They returned probes with corrections. Silicon instead of germanium. They even gave us chemical treatments to improve the lithography process. I was stunned. You're saying they fixed your technology? He nodded. And not just ours. We learned later the Americans received the same help. Same chemical compounds. Same designs. So they made contact too? Kratzoff exhaled. We believe so. But unlike us, they used the technology for consumer markets. To sell gadgets. We used it for defense. Weapons. Control. I shook my head. Then why did they attack? Kratzoff lowered his voice. Because they are not human. They do not feel fear, but they understand it. And they protect themselves. Protect from what? From us. From what they believe we might become. I felt a chill rise up my spine. So, what did they want in return? He hesitated. Experiments. On us. On the human mind. I leaned forward. Psychological experiments. The morning after our long and chilling conversation. Kratzoff was gone. I had expected a goodbye, or at least a note, but the hotel staff confirmed he had checked out before sunrise. That unsettled me more than anything he'd said. There was a finality in his disappearance, like a man who had shared more than he should have, and now had to vanish to protect what little he had left. I spent the next few days back at the conference, trying to focus on academic lectures that suddenly felt hollow. The world of psychology, once mysterious and profound, seemed almost trivial now. None of my colleagues had any idea that while they debated neuroplasticity and behavioral conditioning, I was wrestling with revelations that questioned the very nature of human history, religion, and contact with forces we weren't supposed to understand. 2 weeks later, I received a plain envelope through the post. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and black and white, of the room Kratzoff and I had been in. The angle was high, possibly from a vent or hidden camera. We were seated, facing each other. Scribbled on the back, in Russian, "Not finished yet." That was the beginning of Phase 2. I was back at my university office when the second contact came. A man posing as a maintenance worker asked if I had a moment to look at some suspicious wiring. When I followed him into the corridor, he handed me a cassette tape and left without another word. I recognized the handwriting on the label, Kratzoff. I locked the office door, shut the blinds, and found an old tape recorder in my bottom drawer. The hiss of the tape began, then his voice. "Comrade, forgive the theatrics, but I've learned we were followed that night. Monitored. They know what I told you, so I must speak quickly. You asked me why they would conduct psychological experiments, why alter humans. I have a partial answer now. It is not merely curiosity. It is preparation. You see, they fear what we do not death, but instability, chaos, illogical behavior. They do not understand our ability to destroy what we love, to fight for beliefs, to die for ideas. So they test us. They inject paradoxes into society, conflicting ideologies, artificial scarcity, false prophets. Then they observe how we react. But now, the pattern has changed. In the last transmission, they mentioned what they called the convergence protocol. I do not know all it implies, but they said something that chilled me to my bones. We must simulate extinction to preserve potential. There are agents among you. Not many. Not yet. But they are testing whether small disruptions can create vast changes. Think of them as stress tests. Economic collapses. political upheaval, sudden religious movements that gain millions of followers in months. They are watching which societies adapt, which ones fragment, which ideologies persist, and which mutate. The tape clicked, and I flipped it to side B. Kratsov's voice resumed, slower this time. In 1994, a probe was sent beyond the moon. Officially, it was for solar observation. That was a lie. Its real mission was contact. An object had been orbiting the moon at a decaying angle, invisible to most Earth-based telescopes. We called it Vantor 6. It was not natural. The probe made contact. It transmitted 3 symbols before it vanished. The symbols were studied by both Russian and American teams. Together, one resembled a neural pathway, one was a spiraled helix, and the third, a mirror. We believe the message was clear. You and we are built alike, but only one remembers. If that is true, comrade, then we are not merely being observed. We are being prepared for reintegration. The tape ended. I sat in stunned silence. My brain recoiled at the idea that humanity itself could be a fragmented part of a larger intelligence, an offshoot, possibly even a failed experiment being monitored before reabsorption. I tried to contact Kratsov, of course, but the number he once gave me now belonged to a dry cleaner in Tallinn. My emails bounced. My calls were traced. I noticed new figures watching the building across from my office. Kratsov took another deep breath as he poured himself yet another glass from the minibar. The room was quiet, except for the dull hum of the air conditioner and the clink of the bottle against glass. I didn't interrupt. I sensed something in his demeanor, something heavier than anything he had said before. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about something personal. It wasn't just about technology or ideology, he said finally. They didn't care who ruled the Earth, and what they wanted was time. They needed time and access. I tilted my head. Access to what? To us, he said. To human cognition, emotion, memory. They studied us through devices far more advanced than we could understand. But observation wasn't enough anymore. They needed intervention. He turned and looked at me with hollow eyes. Do you know what it means to have your mind altered without your consent? To wake up not knowing which thoughts are yours, and which ones were placed there like seeds. I swallowed hard. You're saying they reprogrammed people? Kratsov nodded slowly. Yes, but not in the crude way you might imagine. It wasn't hypnosis. It wasn't brainwashing. It was surgical, elegant. They didn't overwrite the mind. They subtly rearranged it, like rearranging furniture in a room you've lived in your whole life. Everything is still there, but nothing feels quite right anymore. I felt an invisible weight press down on me. I knew I'd heard of similar things in psychological literature, reports of anomalous behaviors in seemingly ordinary people, sudden, unexplainable changes. Some called it schizophrenia, others suggested trauma. But what if, just what if, these were glimpses of something deeper? Kratsov stepped over to his bag and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. I shouldn't show you this, he said, but I copied it myself. These are logs from 1991. They were given to me by a man who died in a psychiatric facility 2 months later. He was part of a team at a remote Siberian research post. His job was to document behavioral shifts in 12 selected individuals. He handed me the book. The entries were clinical at first. Observations on sleep patterns, speech, cognition. Then the tone changed. Descriptions grew darker. Obsessive behavior. Visions. incoherent language that mimicked ancient dialects. One man believed he had been alive for thousands of years and had merely awakened. What happened to these individuals? I asked, flipping through the last pages. They disappeared, Kratsov said simply. 3 of them walked into the forest during a blizzard and were never found. One woman locked herself in a cabin and starved. The rest, we don't know. I closed the notebook. My mind was spiraling. So, what was the endgame? I asked. What were these entities trying to achieve? They don't operate with goals the way we understand them, he said. But if I had to guess, I'd say they were running simulations, testing variables. Different people, different environments, different mental compositions. Each subject was a test of how adaptable the human psyche is when confronted with truths it was never meant to know. I remembered something he'd said earlier. You mentioned anti-prophets. People altered not to spread truth, but to spread something else. Kratsov gave a solemn nod. Exactly. The idea was simple. If prophets could ignite belief in millions, what could an anti-prophet do? What happens when someone spreads doubt, not of governments or ideologies, but of reality itself? I felt my skin crawl. You're talking about psychological sabotage, inducing existential breakdowns in entire populations. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled something else from his bag, a photograph. Grainy, black and white. It showed a crowd of people gathered in a town square somewhere in Eastern Europe. Standing at the center was a man in a plain suit. His eyes seemed to glow unnaturally, even in the low resolution. This man, Kratsov said, was never identified. He appeared in towns across 5 countries over 6 years. Every time, he delivered a speech, never recorded, never repeated, and every time, within days, those towns would erupt into chaos. Mass suicides, riots, collective hallucinations. Authorities covered it up, but I kept the pattern. What happened to him? I whispered. He vanished in 1996. Same year I left the agency. I think they deactivated him, or moved him to a new region, maybe even here. The thought sent chills down my spine. So what now? Are they still out there? Kratsov looked at me like I had asked the simplest, most obvious question. Of course they are. They never left. They're part of the atmosphere now, embedded in the frequency of thought, in the architecture of our ideas. I couldn't breathe for a moment. So, what do? He smiled, not with comfort, but resignation. We prepare, we observe, we remember what was real before the interference began. Then he raised his glass and said, "To memory, comrade. The last line of defense." I drank with him, but my thoughts were no longer my own. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick with something unspoken, as if the walls themselves remembered what had just been said. I could still hear Kratsov's last words echoing in my head. To memory, comrade. The last line of defense. But what disturbed me most wasn't the fear. It was the feeling of validation. The quiet realization that 100 little cracks in the narrative of my own life suddenly aligned with what he was telling me. Dreams I couldn't explain. Déjà vu so sharp it left me dizzy. People I knew shifting personalities over the years, as if being rewritten. Kratsov tapped his glass against the table softly. "There's more," he said, "and I'm not sure you're ready to hear it." I leaned forward. I wasn't ready for any of this, and yet, here I am. He nodded. Fair enough. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope, yellowed with age. Inside was a cassette tape. No label, just a strip of black magnetic film. This was intercepted by a Norwegian weather station in 1994. They thought it was noise at first. But when a technician played it through an old analog speaker system, something strange happened. He walked over to the hotel television stand and opened a portable cassette player he had brought with him. As the tape rolled, a low, pulsating hum filled the room. Then came a clicking pattern, irregular and sharp, like fingers tapping on glass from the other side. My spine stiffened. Then a voice, faint, distorted, genderless, not in any known language. Yet somehow, I understood, not through words, but through impulse. It said, "We know how you dream. We have walked the corridors of your ancestors, and we are waiting for the silence to return." Kratsov stopped the tape. "I've played that for linguists, cryptographers, even shamans," he said. None of them could agree on what it meant. But most didn't want to hear it again. One man vomited during playback. Another started laughing and didn't stop for an hour. I stared at the machine. Where did it come from? He hesitated. Some say it was a transmission from deep beneath the earth. Others believe it was bounced off the moon, then redirected through frequencies we don't monitor. "Are you saying," I asked slowly, "that the transmissions aren't from space, but from below us?" "Yes," he said, "or both. It's no longer clear where the message originates. All we know is that they communicate through resonance, through pressure, through dreams." I felt like the floor beneath me had shifted. "You mean they access our thoughts directly?" Kratsov lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. "Not thoughts. Archetypes. Emotions. Concepts that live deeper than language. They can embed a suggestion not by speaking, but by vibrating the root of a memory." I was silent for a long moment. Then I asked, "Has this happened to me?" He looked at me carefully. "Do you ever wake up feeling like someone else lived your night for you? That your memories are secondhand?" I didn't answer. He took that as confirmation. "There's a pattern," he said, "and you're fitting into it. That's why I came to find you again." I blinked. "Again?" He looked away. "This isn't our first conversation, comrade. It's just the first one you remember." My heart stopped. "You're saying I've been reset?" "Modified," he corrected. "Not erased. They never erase. They add layers, like paint on a wall. And sometimes, under the right light, the old patterns bleed through." I stood, dizzy. "Why me?" He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Because you're already broken in the right ways. Because you can hold conflicting truths in your mind without shattering." There was a knock at the door. A single, deliberate knock. Kratsov looked through the peephole and stiffened. "Don't move," he whispered. He gestured for me to sit silently, then opened the door just a crack. A man stood there, early 40s, clean-shaven, dressed like hotel staff, but his expression was wrong. Too blank, too symmetrical. "Yes?" Kratsov asked in perfect English. The man smiled with teeth that didn't belong in his mouth. "There's been a complaint about noise," he said calmly. "May I come in?" "No," Kratsov answered. "There's no noise." The man leaned closer. "We heard the tape." That was when I saw it. His eyes didn't dilate. They didn't move. They reflected the hallway light like black glass. Kratsov shut the door instantly and bolted it. "We need to leave. Now." I grabbed my bag, adrenaline wiping away the fog in my head. Who was that? "They're called sentinels," he said. "Projections. They don't live like we do. They exist between impressions. They only show up when a signal has been accessed in the wrong way." "You mean the tape?" "Yes. But more than that, you heard it. You understood it. That's the problem. I didn't ask any more questions. We slipped out the back stairwell and disappeared into the London night. But from that moment, I knew. I had become part of something I could never walk away from. We didn't speak much after we left the hotel. The cold London night bit at our faces as we crossed underpasses and alleyways. Kratsov had one hand in his coat pocket the whole time, and I couldn't tell if it was because of the chill or because he was gripping a weapon. Eventually, we reached a black car parked beneath an underlit bridge. No license plates, no logos. The doors unlocked without a sound. He motioned for me to get in. I hesitated only a second before I obeyed. "Where are we going?" I asked, once we were moving. "To see someone who remembers more than we do," he replied. The rest of the drive was silent. I noticed we passed through 2 toll checkpoints without stopping. The guards saw us, looked at the car, then turned away. No questions, no scans. It was close to 3 a.m. when we arrived at what looked like an abandoned warehouse near the Thames, surrounded by rusted fencing and weeds. Kratsov used a small metal key, an actual physical key, to open the gate. Then we stepped inside. The interior was unlike anything I expected. Old servers buzzed in stacks, floor to ceiling, glowing dim blue and green. Wires draped like ivy. Dozens of analog monitors hummed with static and flickering symbols. In the corner, a single desk lamp shone over a leather-bound book, and an impossibly old-looking reel-to-reel machine. A man sat behind the desk, bald, eyes magnified behind thick lenses. He looked up at us and smiled. "Welcome back," he said. Kratsov motioned to me. "He doesn't remember." "I didn't expect him to," the man said. "Most who come here for the second time don't." I felt nauseous again. "What is this place?" "This," the man said, gesturing around, "is the Ghost Archive." The name sent a ripple down my spine. "We store things here," he continued, "but not things you can touch. Memories, deleted reports, audio that never made it to tape, visuals erased from national security servers. All of it, gathered and saved here." "Why?" I asked. "Because memory is a battlefield," he said simply, "and the side with better archives wins." He handed me a manila folder. Inside was a photo of a man who looked eerily familiar, until I realized it was me. But older, much older. Beard flecked with gray, eyes sunken, but the same nose, same scar on the chin. The caption read, "Subject Omega, recovered attempt number 3. "I don't understand," I whispered. "You've been here before," the man said. 3 times, actually. Each time, after an encounter or a bleed-through. But every time, you chose to forget." Kratsov looked at me, then nodded toward the archive keeper. "Show him the transmission." The man hesitated, then flipped a switch on one of the reels. The static from the monitors around us dimmed, replaced by a low-frequency hum that settled into a near rhythm, like breathing. Then a voice emerged. Not human, not alien either, more like the idea of a voice. Something trying to mimic the shape of speech, but not understanding its purpose. "The vessels are cracking. The dreamers stir. You should not have remembered. You were not meant to return." The recording ended. The silence after was heavier than before. "That was intercepted 6 days ago," the man said, "from beneath Antarctica." I felt the blood drain from my face. I thought this was all tied to the moon. "It was," said Kratsov, "but it isn't anymore." He pointed at a world map on the wall. Red pins dotted specific locations. The Sea of Tranquility, Lake Vostok, Chernobyl, Roswell, the Gulf of Aden, and one pin oddly located in the English countryside. "They're not in one place," he continued. They never were. The moon was just a doorway. Antarctica is a basement. England, he pointed. That's a cradle. A cradle for what? For what they left behind, the man said. Residuals, copies. Sometimes entire lives woven into ours. People who were never born but walk among us. Ideas that infect. I sat down, dizzy. This is too much. It always is, the archivist replied gently. Which is why you chose to forget. He placed a sealed envelope on the desk. You have a choice again. You can walk away. I'll give you a name, a new memory, and you'll live the rest of your life never remembering this night. Or, I asked, you stay, and we show you what's in the basement. I looked at Kratsov. He didn't say a word. His face gave away nothing. But something in his eyes told me he hoped I'd say no, but I couldn't. I had to know. I pushed the envelope away. I want to remember. The archivist nodded slowly. Then follow me. He opened a door behind the desk, revealing a staircase lit by a single flickering bulb. And I stepped into the dark, not knowing if I'd ever return. The staircase felt alive. Each step downward creaked not with age, but like something was testing our weight, measuring our presence. The archivist led the way, lantern in hand. Kratsov followed, silent as ever. I brought up the rear, clutching the cold steel railing as the air thickened. The stairs ended in what looked like a small service tunnel, carved out of the bedrock. Piping ran along the ceiling, half-rusted, dripping condensation. The deeper we went, the more I noticed the symbols, carved into the stone, etched into metal, even burned onto the old concrete. At first I thought they were Cyrillic, then Sumerian, then something mathematical, but none matched anything I'd seen before. We passed through 3 pressure-locked doors. Each had to be opened manually. With every door, the air changed. Colder, more static in the air, like the moments before a thunderstorm. My skin began to itch. Finally, the corridor opened into a hexagonal chamber, bare rock walls smoothed to a matte sheen, as though liquefied and cooled unnaturally. In the center of the room was a pedestal. Hovering just above it was an object I couldn't quite comprehend. It shimmered. No, rippled, like a reflection in water that wasn't there. It shifted shape constantly, never solid, yet completely real. My brain screamed contradiction. This, the archivist whispered, is what we found after the failed mission. It was beneath the Sea of Tranquility, embedded in a cave system 2 kilometers under the surface. We didn't dig it out. It was delivered. Delivered by... What? I asked, my voice barely audible. We don't know, Kratsov said flatly. But it was waiting, as if it expected us. Expected the Soviets? I asked. Number humanity. I moved closer to the pedestal. As I did, the object reacted. The shimmering slowed, then stabilized into a geometric form. An icosahedron made of mirrored surfaces. Except the reflections weren't of the room. They were of places I'd never seen. Deserts with black suns. Forests with glowing trees. A sky where lightning fell upwards. Don't touch it, the archivist warned. I had no intention of doing so. Kratsov stepped beside me. It communicates with select individuals, not in words, in impressions, concepts. Have you touched it? I asked. Once, he said. It showed me a city inside a glacier, still lit, still breathing. And you? I turned to the archivist. He looked away. I heard a voice say my name before I was ever born. My legs weakened. What is it made of? We don't know. Every scan returns different materials, sometimes silicon, sometimes bone. Once, it read as human DNA, compressed into a crystalline structure. My mind reeled. What does it want? Nothing, the archivist said. That's the problem. I didn't understand. If it had wants, we could predict its behavior, he continued. Negotiate, strategize. But it simply is. I turned to Kratsov. Why bring me here? Because it reacted to you before, he said. In 1990, during the conditioning simulations, you passed out when we showed you images of the object's reflection. I don't remember any of that. You did. Then you chose not to. The archivist moved toward a console embedded in the wall. He flipped a switch, and a hidden speaker crackled to life. Static. Then beneath it, a whisper. Not a word, not a language, just a sound that felt like it had always existed, buried beneath our awareness. I staggered. What is that? Kratsov steadied me. That is its voice, as best we can render it. It's speaking now. No, the archivist said. This is a recording. From 1968, I blinked. You recorded this in 68? He nodded. From the helmet mic of the last surviving cosmonaut. I looked at the object again. Its shape had shifted once more. A spiral, a helix. Then, it mirrored my face. Only, not quite. The eyes were wrong, wider, pupilless, smiling without smiling. I backed away. It's learning, the archivist said. Each contact increases its familiarity. With us. With thought, I suddenly remembered what Kratsov had said earlier. The experiments on people. They were connected to this, weren't they? He nodded. Why? The archivist responded this time. Because this thing doesn't understand individuality. It thinks of humanity as one being, one organism. It doesn't know the difference between a man in Moscow and a child in Sydney. So the psychological experiments were its way of testing how to separate us or recombine us, Kratsov said. There were patterns, mass dreams, shared hallucinations in different countries, waking visions. And what happens if it succeeds? Silence. I turned to them both. What happens if it learns to think like us? Kratsov didn't blink. Then it becomes human. And if it doesn't? The archivist said, then it remakes humanity to think like it. For the first time since entering the archive, I felt real fear. Not fear of the unknown, but of something known, creeping back into memory. A dream I hadn't had yet. A sound I hadn't heard, but always remembered. I stepped back toward the tunnel. I need air, I whispered. Kratsov followed me, silent, but I could tell. He understood. We left the object behind, but it didn't leave us. The day after the archive visit, I woke in my hotel room drenched in sweat. I hadn't dreamt. At least, not in any way I could recall. But something was missing. Time. I glanced at the clock. 4:07 a.m. I was certain I'd closed my eyes just a moment ago, but the sunlight beginning to edge over the curtains said otherwise. Something had been taken. Kratsov knocked at precisely 4:15. Always punctual. We need to leave, he said flatly. Now. Why? What's happened? He tossed a folder onto the bed. Inside were 4 grainy satellite photos. Each showed a city somewhere on Earth. New York, Istanbul, Tokyo, and Lagos. In each, above a tall building or a square or a rooftop, hovered the same structure I'd seen the night before. The object. It wasn't just underground anymore. They're appearing all over, Kratsov said. Only for seconds, but long enough to be seen. Long enough to be felt. I stared at the photos. How many? 37 confirmed, at least. My skin turned to ice. The photographs weren't the worst part. The worst part was what followed them. reports, scattered news stories, minor mentions, mass fainting spells, clusters of children speaking in unison, strangers describing the same dream down to the detail. "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means it's begun," he said. "The experiment." I could barely speak. "The anti-prophets?" Kratzoff nodded slowly. "They won't appear in robes or float on clouds. They won't need to. Their message is imprinted. Quiet. Viral. It's not about belief. It's about transformation." We packed. He handed me a burner phone and a sealed envelope with coordinates. "If anything happens to me, you go there. You'll be expected." We left through the back. No words. No lingering. I didn't ask what happened to the archivist. I didn't want the answer. We drove south, through the English countryside. Kratzoff remained quiet most of the time, only offering observations when necessary, about shadows moving against the grain of the moonlight, of birds flying in spirals before vanishing altogether. "They are studying us more openly now," he muttered. "How do we stop it? You don't stop a tidal wave. You survive it." After 5 hours, we arrived at a derelict RAF station. Barbed wire rusted into useless coils, old signs warning about unexploded ordnance. Kratzoff used a retinal scanner on what appeared to be a rusted storage unit. The wall hissed and split open. Inside was something I didn't expect. A command center. Clean. Powered. Active. Screens showing orbital telemetry. Population density maps. Frequency band scans. A woman greeted us. Late 50s. Lab coat. Tired eyes. "You're late," she said to Kratzoff. He grunted. "He's here now. That's what matters." She extended her hand to me. "Dr. Ilara Briggs, Cognitive Linguistics and Neural Semiotics. You're the psychologist, I take it." "Not the only one," I muttered. She half smiled. "None of us are only one thing anymore." She led us to a vault. Inside, more of the objects. Not shimmering this time. Solid. Dormant. Contained inside reinforced magnetic chambers. A dozen of them. "They've been arriving since 2002, Ilara said. "Buried. Hidden. Disguised. We believe they're relay nodes." "For what?" I asked. "A broadcast. One we can't yet decode." On the wall behind them was a monitor, flickering with symbols, constantly rearranging, mutating. "They're learning to speak," Ilara said. Kratzoff added, "Or teaching us to listen." Then the alarms began, high-pitched, piercing. Ilara rushed to a panel. Node 5 is activating. The structure's changing. On the screen, the 5th object began to shimmer, then pulse. Lights danced along its edges, then a spike of light. Brief, silent, and then audio, not speech, music, melancholy, discordant, like a hymn hummed by a dying machine. I felt my knees give. Kratzoff caught me. "You hear it," he whispered. Ilara turned to me, astonished. "You can hear it?" "Yes," I said. It's in my head." "Then you're one of them," she said softly. "Not fully, but enough." I stared at her. "What are you saying?" "You've been altered. Since 1990. Since before. Maybe. That's why Kratzoff chose you. That's why the object mirrored you." I looked to Kratzoff, furious. "You knew?" He didn't deny it. "We didn't know what you'd become," he said. "But now we need you to finish what was started." I was shaking. "What does that mean?" Ilara approached me, calm but firm. "We think there's one last signal. A final broadcast. One that resets the entire cognitive field of the human species. Every mind, every memory. Realigned." I was horrified. "That's mass rewriting." "It's evolution," she said. "Or extinction." I backed away. "You want me to help send it?" "No," Kratzoff said. We want you to stop it." Silence fell. "You're the anchor," he added. "Your altered brain can receive and reject the final wave, if you choose to. And if I don't," Ilara said, "then it transmits. And everything we are becomes something else." I looked at the object, now pulsating gently in its cage. Not menacing, almost mournful. I stepped forward. I placed my hand on the glass, and I remembered everything. The moon, the screams, the eyes that weren't eyes, the whispers that taught me how to think outside of language. I remembered the face it had shown me in the hotel mirror. My own, yet not mine. And I understood. It wasn't trying to destroy us. It was trying to join us. I turned to Kratsov and Ilara. "I'll do it." They nodded. Then Ilara activated the receiver, and the transmission began. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then, everything. Light, thought, history, pain, beauty, the memory of stars being born and dying, the sound of silence before the first atom moved. And then, it stopped. I opened my eyes. Kratsov stood, stunned. Ilara wept. The signal was gone. The objects fell silent. And for the first time in centuries, humanity was alone again.